Hey, what's going on, AP guys? We have the Spanish-American War for you today. Everything you need to know about the Spanish-American War for your APUSH exam. So let's get started. We're going to talk about some important topics going on before the war that starts in 1898. And we have a guy by the name of Alfred T. Mahan. He was an admiral in the U.S. Navy, and he wrote a very influential book called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. And the thesis of this book is that a strong navy is the key to world dominance. So this is going to encourage the United States to build up its navy, which after the Spanish-American War will be one of the most powerful in the entire world. In Cuba, we have a Spanish general by the name of General Weyler, nicknamed Butcher Weyler, who there were reports of being very brutal to the Cubans living there. He threw them in reconcentration camps, and many of these Cubans ended up dying from disease or starvation. So he was this very painted as this very bad guy, in the U.S. did not like him and felt bad for the Cubans. Yellow journalism, which we'll talk about again in a minute, is a huge cause of the Spanish-American War. The definition of yellow journalism is the exaggeration of stories to sell newspapers. And the two pioneers of yellow journalism are Hearst and Pulitzer. And the purpose of them exaggerating stories is to get people to buy their newspapers. There were two competing newspaper firms in New York City, and each one of them tried to outdo the other. So yellow journalism is going to play a huge role in the Spanish-American War. Now we need to get into some causes of the war. The first is the USS Maine, and this was stationed in Cuba as kind of protection for Americans living there. Well, one day it mysteriously blows up, and nobody really knew what happened at the time, but that didn't stop the yellow journalists from exaggerating the stories. And there were pictures of the ship blowing up, and then there were implications that the Spanish basically were responsible for this. So that's a huge cause. Another one is the Delome letter written by this guy, Enrique Delome. He is a Spanish minister, and he basically trash talked McKinley. He said that he was weak, he was catering to the rabble, which means like the poor people, the lower class people, and Americans were furious with this. Those two things, coupled with yellow journalism, is going to make the American public demand war. So if you ever see a question, what was the real reason why the U.S. got involved in the war? All three of these are definitely reasons, but the overwhelming one, the American public demanded going to war with Spain. That was huge. Okay, let's talk about some important info about the war. It was declared on April 11th of 1898. It lasted about 4 months or so. There is a Teller Amendment which promised Cuba that they would be given their freedom once the U.S. overthrew the Spanish. And we'll see if that comes true. Most Americans, if you ever see a question about American deaths during the Spanish-American War, they were not from battle. They were not from combat. They were from illness. About 5,000 Americans died from disease. Only about 400 died from actual fighting. So most Americans died from illness. Teddy Roosevelt burst onto the world stage as leader of the Rough Riders. You can see him right here. This was a group of his friends, some from Harvard when he went there, some from the days when he was in the Dakotas. They played an important role in charging San Juan Hill. And the U.S. presence in Latin America increases drastically after the Spanish-American War. So it begins a period of imperialism, U.S. imperialism. Okay, some effects of the war. The U.S. gains a lot of land. They gain Guam, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. And one of the cases that's going to go before the Supreme Court is called the Insular Cases. And the question is, does the Constitution apply to all these people now in Guam, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Philippines, and any other territories that the U.S. requires? And the Supreme Court says no, the Constitution does not necessarily apply to new areas. In other words, people living in Guam or the Philippines are not going necessarily given the same rights as American citizens. So the rules are different for them than they are for American citizens. And please know the Platt Amendment. Remember, the Teller Amendment tells Cuba they will get their freedom after the war. The Platt Amendment is where the U.S. becomes a little more involved. And Cuba cannot have treaties with other countries that compromise their independence. And the U.S. can intervene to restore order if they feel it's necessary. But most importantly, Guantanamo Bay is given to the United States. That's why today the U.S. has a military base in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. There were definitely some outspoken people against the Spanish-American War and imperialism, and most notably was the Anti-Imperialist League. It was led by Mark Twain over here, William Jennings Bryan right here, and presidents of Harvard, Stanford. Samuel Gompers was in there, the guy who was the leader of the AFL, and even Carnegie as well, or Carnegie, if you want to pronounce it correctly. So not everybody was on board with imperialism. Okay, we'll finish up with the Philippines. Philippines, just like Cuba, thought they would receive their independence at the end of the Spanish-American War. This does not happen. McKinley had different plans. He wanted to civilize or Christianize them. And one of the leaders of the Philippines, or who becomes a war leader, is Emilio Aguinaldo, and he wanted revenge for this. He felt betrayed that the Philippines should absolutely get their independence. So he starts a little guerrilla war with the United States. He uses guerrilla warfare. Eventually, he is going to stop, and in 1946, the Philippines gained their independence. Okay, that's everything you need to know about the Spanish-American War for the APUSH exam. Please check out my other war videos as well. If you could take a moment and subscribe to my channel if you have not already. Help spread the word on Twitter, Facebook. Tell your friends in your classes, please. I would greatly appreciate it. And let me know if you know who that guy is in the picture. Thanks for watching. Have a good day, guys.